Do you want to know how I made this in Ableton Live using only Ableton plugins and one little free plugin? Check this out.
I took her out, it was a Friday night, I work alone to get the feeling right. We started making out and she took off my pants, but then I turned on the TV and that's about the time she walked away from me. Nobody likes you when you play.
First of all, welcome to my channel. Here we talk a lot about making rock music in Ableton Live, so if you're into that, subscribe to my channel. I got a lot more like this coming in the future, so yeah. Today, we're gonna start with the BLINK-182 classic, What's My Age Again. And What's My Age Again is probably one of the best produced pop-punk songs of all time. It's an amazing production. So that is why I decided to reverse engineer it. This is actually an exercise I do a lot on my own. It's one of the best ways to learn how to achieve the sounds that you love by yourself, trying to listen to them in a song critically and recreating them with the gear that you have. That's the best way to start making your music sound the way that you want it to sound. And even though I do this a lot on my own, I thought, why not share with you, my subscribers? I think everybody can benefit from watching me recreate this song. I'm probably gonna get a copyright strike from YouTube, but since I don't make any money from YouTube anyways, what do I have to lose, right? And I have a complicated relationship with copyright and all this stuff, because I'm from Brazil, right? I grew up buying PlayStation games from a guy under a bridge, so copyright is a very loose subject to me, a Brazilian from the 90s. And also, to make this exercise a little bit more difficult on me, I'm gonna use only Ableton Live plugins. I know, I'm gonna use one little extra plugin that's free, so you can just download it anyways. It's not gonna be a big hassle. But all of the plugins I'm gonna use to mix and all that stuff, it's in Ableton Live 11 Suite. If you have Ableton Live 11 Suite, you can just watch this video and copy my settings if you want. I warn you now, it's not gonna be a perfect copy, because these guys spent a lot of money making this song, and I didn't spend any money making this song. We don't have the same gear, we don't have the same nothing. I'm not Jerry Finn, who produced the song, I'm not that good. But I'm gonna do my best, and I think I got pretty close to at least getting the vibe of the song right. And that's what you want. You wanna get the vibe, because people are not really listening if a song sounds exactly like the other one. You wanna reference a song and give a vibe. And if you can do that, your productions will go up and up and up forever. So let's start from the beginning. Drums. Most punk recording processes start by recording the drums. I'm using a free SLATE drums pack called Hugo. There's a link in the description to download the SLATE free drums thing. So if you want it, just download it out there. You're gonna have the exact same sound I'm using in this session right here. They sound a bit different from Travis's drums, but you know, Travis has a really characteristic drum sound. So unless somebody tries to release a pack simulating Travis's drum sound, or if Travis decides to release a drum pack, it's not gonna be exactly the same, but in mixing, I can make little moves to kind of get it closer to the Travis drum sound, so just bear that in mind. Okay, so as you can see, I have an empty Ableton Live session here. So the first step is to find out the BPM of What's My Age Again. And I already told you this once, but there's a really cool website called tunebat.com. You go to the website right here, and if you look for What's My Age Again, it tells you the BPM and the key of the song, which is pretty useful, right? So What's My Age Again, 158 BPM. All right, let's close this up. Let's put it up here in Ableton. 158, enter. There you go. Now our session is theoretically in the same BPM as What's My Age Again. The next step is to have a file of What's My Age Again. I have a WAV file that I bought. You can use an MP3, whatever you got. You can rip it from a CD. Whatever What's My Age Again version that you have in your computer, you can just drag it into your session. So let me find mine here. There you go. Dragging it in right here in any track. And now I have to try and line this up to my grid as best as I can. So I'm just gonna zoom in here. These are the drums. You see the little transients here. This obviously are the drums. So just gonna drag this to the grid right here. I'm gonna zoom in, get it really close. Doesn't have to be perfect, but pretty close, you know? As you can see, it's kind of matching, but it's not matching. This song is from the 90s, and in the 90s, people didn't use clicks all the time, metronomes, right? Sometimes the only person responsible for the rhythm of the song was the drummer. The drummer went in, recorded first. Sometimes the bass and the guitar just played like a scratch track next to the drums, but the drum went in and played, and whatever the drum played was the official tempo of the song. So it went up and down and up and down, which is great because it makes it sound really human. It makes some parts a little bit slower and it makes them a little bit mellower. It makes other parts a little bit faster and a little bit more energetic, right? So it's really cool that it has these BPM variations. This is not a necessary step to copy the song. You could just set your BPM to 158 and do it, but it would be a little bit easier and a little bit cooler to maintain the same groove that Travis gave to the track, because that way you're gonna have a one-to-one copy when you're comparing the both mixes, and you're gonna have an actual human dictating the groove of your song, which is awesome. So how do you do that in Ableton? As you can see here, the song is not matching the grid completely. It's kind of matching, but not completely, right? So what you do is you open automation mode up here, then you open your master track down here. And as you can see, it's already on song tempo on mine, but if it's not on yours, you can just go to mixer and song tempo. And here you can use this line to automate the BPM of your song, which is really easy and awesome. So the best way we can do this is just delete all of these unnecessary tracks for now. Make this one really big, make this one really big, and let's automate the BPM to make this track as close to the grid as possible. So the first step is to double click your clip here and just make sure that warp is off. We don't want to warp this one. We want to keep it the original clip, not warp it, right? So warp is off. So now we can get in here, look at the waves up here, right? We can turn on the click as well, just to have a reference of the click and how it's sounding. So the way that I do this is I get little chunks of the song like this. You see, I choose like a random chunk of the song. There you go. And then I hover my mouse right under this line here. It turns blue. I click it down here and I drag it up. And it's gonna, see, automate just that little section. And you can see the waves up there are bending, but our grid is not. But what's actually happening is our grid is bending and the song is not. It's just a visual reference. So the grid remains the same visually in Ableton, but what's actually being warped here is your grid and not the audio of your track. Because remember, warp is off. We are not warping, all right? So really easy now. We gotta move this around till we start seeing the transients match up here, right? So you see it's matching. We move forward a bit. You see these ones are starting not to match that much as well. So we can get down here, mark it like this again, hover near the line like this, grab it, and just, oh yeah, there you go. See, matching a little bit better. Next spot, let's go, hover, drag it. You see, it's not perfect, but it's close enough. So if you play it with the click,
And we started making out, and she took off my pants, but then I
it's kind of matching, right? So I did this with the whole song, and this is what I got. Just gonna open the master for you guys to see here in automation mode. Mixer, song tempo. Look at this. This BPM varies a lot in this song. And this is just how songs were when they were played by humans and not machines. And it's really cool. It's really cool. So you see, you don't have to be ashamed if you're a drummer and you kind of have some trouble with the click, because a click is a really boring thing. We gotta just admit it, right? So this is how much Travis, one of the best drummers in the world, varies his BPM across this track. Pretty awesome, right? So the next step is to draw in the drums right here. And I already did this, as you can see here, because it's really a boring process you don't want to watch. I actually have a video of me doing this from scratch if you want to watch it. But to summarize it, I listen to the original track and I play along with it. First playing just kick and snare with my fingers on my keyboard. Then I do a hi-hat pass. Then I do a cymbals pass. And then I do a fills pass, which usually I have to combine a little bit of playing and drawing to make sure everything's precise, because I'm not that good with my fingers, unfortunately. And always remember, when you're overdubbing drums in MIDI mode, turn on the little plus button here in Ableton Live. That turns on MIDI merge, so that way you're not overriding the MIDI you recorded before. You're just recording on top and on top and on top over and over again. All right, so let's hear how these drums sound right now. And you see these drums are following perfectly to the song because we did this whole automation thing down here, right? So we have kinda the same groove that Travis had when he recorded this song, which is pretty awesome to me, at least. And it was really easy to do it in Ableton as well. The next step is another step that I have a separate video about, so go watch that. But it's separating these drums here. You see Steven SLATE drums is just a plugin right here, a drum plugin. I'm using Deluxe to free Hugo. So if you want to have the same sound as I do in this session, this is the drum kit that I used, free. right? But everything is in one track, and there's nothing wrong with that, but we want to get it closer to Travis's drums, right? So I want to mix these tracks individually. As I said it before, I have a video of how to spread these drums across tracks in Ableton Live, but the quick gist of it is you got to use these outputs here. You see, you got these outputs here. You got to put all of the elements into different outputs. And then when you make a new track in Ableton Live here, you choose the drums track where your drums are, right, as the inputs. And then instead of post mixer, you can just get the outputs from Steven Slate drums right here. You see all of the outputs that are here, right? You see these outputs here are going to show up down here. And then you make a track per piece of your drum. So for example, kick, and snare, and blah, blah, blah. And you choose the different inputs right here. Pretty easy, right? But go watch the full video about this because it's a much better explanation than this. Now let's get into mixing those drums so you can see the tricks that I use to make it sound more like the original track. Travis's drums are usually tuned quite high, so it has a pointy sound to it, which is good to cut through a punk mix, right? These drums are not particularly high tuned or pointy, so you're gonna see me boosting high frequencies quite a lot in EQs here, but you will get the point once we start doing this. So here we go. Let me solo the kick first. So the kick, as you can see, not a lot is going on here. These drums sound quite good already. So this is before, and this is after. I'm using a little bit of compression, and the compression is just to make the kick a little bit snappier and have a little bit more of a cool sustain, a little bit of a longer sustain. These kicks have to be very snappy. So if you put an attack that's a bit slower, it's gonna let your transients get through, and then it's gonna compress your sustain, and your sustain is gonna sound cooler because it's gonna be more sustainy. It's gonna be sustained for longer because it's being compressed. And your transient is gonna get through the compression, and it's gonna be pure and immaculate. I hope that made sense. Compression is a weird thing to explain, isn't it? Just doing this little bit of compression here, not much. You see 3 to 1 kinda. Then the important part to get to the Travis kick is to boost this high mid area here around 1.7K here. You see this is without that, this is with. I'm just getting that attack from the kick even pointier because this is a punk song and the kick has to cut through, and it's a fast kick and it has to cut through every time. So making it a little bit pointier here, and it's a kick. You have to kind of consider the low end, right? Even though the low end is not the most important part of a punk kick, you still have to consider it, right? So I'm boosting low end here on the channel EQ. You're gonna see this thing happening a lot where I use 2 EQs in one track, and you might be asking why couldn't I just boost the low end on this EQ here? I could, but I like stacking EQs. I think it gives me a chance to approach EQing the track twice in different ways, especially if I use 2 different EQs, right? It gives me a chance not only to keep all my moves from my first EQ pass, but it also gives me a chance to push them farther. It's just much better. And it also gives me the taste of 2 EQs. This is a very clean EQ. This EQ is a bit more mellow and it has a sound to it. So I added 2 sounds. I still have the 2 EQs to play around with. And of course, if you've done a mistake in a previous EQ, it's better to go back to it and fix it there. But if you like the EQ that you've done in the beginning, you don't want to mess with it, and it's not ruining your track, just put another EQ in there. EQ it in the next one. It's all good. Don't be afraid to stack plugins, even though they're kind of the same plugins, right? Especially if you're using Ableton Live plugins in Ableton Live, because you see my CPU up here? It's barely touching it. And I don't have one of those new fancy Macs, believe me. So pretty cool. Next one, the snare. Snare again, you see, pretty simple. This is before my processing right here. And this is after my processing. You see, I'm bringing up the body of the snare here around 300 Hertz, right? Which I thought it needed to be a little bit thicker when I compared one song to the other when I was mixing. And I'm putting a little bit more high frequency. You can really hear it in the mix that the snare is quite hyped. So I had to boost this right here. Again, glue compressor with kind of a slow attack to make the snare a little bit more snappy. Saturated to make it a little bit more saturated. You know, when people recorded these songs, they recorded onto consoles, onto tape, everything added saturation. So it's a good habit that even though we don't have the consoles that they had back in the day, to make a habit to add some saturation to tracks, because if you add a little bit in individual tracks, it's closer to what you would get to a console than just adding saturation to your whole mix in the end. So a little bit of saturation. See, snare really simple, nothing too special here. The toms in the Steven Slate plugin sounded so good that I didn't mess with them. at all. No plugins. No plugins at all. Hi-hat as well. No plugins. Ride. No plugins. Overhead. I had to use channel EQ to make it a little bit mellower because I felt the cymbals of this drum kit in Steven SLATE drums were a bit brighter than Travis's cymbals and a bit too loud in the mix as well. So instead of just lowering the whole overhead volume here, which I did as well, I still wanted to have that overhead sound, but I didn't want the cymbals to be as present. So I lowered the high end a little bit and got the cymbals out of there. For the room, see, no processing because the Steven SLATE drums, they already processed these room mics here, you see? So you see this other one, I also only have utility for automation, but the other one, no plugging at all. It sounded good. All right, and the trick to get these drums sounding as close as possible, even though I did some little moves in the individual tracks, the big trick is to group all of the tracks into a group. Right here, you see the drums group and process that group a little bit more heavy-handed to get your drums closer to Travis's drums, right? And not many plugins still, but they're making a little bit of bigger moves, I would say. So let's just mute them all and play them for you. Don't mind utility here. Utility is here for a trick that I use for automation. I have a video about that, a separate video, why I use utility to automate the volumes of my tracks instead of using the fader up here. Go watch that video, it's pretty cool, but the basic idea is that if I do the automation here, the gain automation, I keep this fader free for mixing later on, right? And I don't have to open the automation view and mess around with the whole automation pass that I did. It's a cool trick. Always automate on utility. It's the best utility for utility. Anyways, this is my drums without the group processing. And this is with. You see, there's a bigger difference there than there was in the individual tracks. For sure, it's much more hyped, much more exciting. So let me go through the individual steps. So let's start with the EQ8. As you see, the EQ8 is here to boost high end. EQ8, I'm trying to get more attack from these drums. I pushed them a little bit in the individual tracks, but I want more attack. When I compared my track to the reference, I needed more. So I pushed it. Don't be afraid to push it. If you're hearing something in the reference and you're like, man, I'm not quite there, but look at my EQ moves, man. They're going to be too big. Don't be afraid to make your EQ moves big. If it's going to get you to the final result that you want, make it happen. All right. So yeah, this is boosting high end quite a lot to get more transients, more snappiness, more excitement in these drums. You really see the hi-hat come true now and the transients and air just fills it up with air, doesn't it? And next step, glue compressor. And here it's doing two things. It's gluing things because drums need to be glued together because they're mainly one instrument with different parts, I would say, but it's still one instrument. So we're gluing the drums together, but we're also leaving a slow attack and a fast release. And that's because the slow attack is gonna let your transients come true. It's a punk song. Sharp, fast transients have to come true and have to cut through your mix, right? The fast release is here because it's a fast song. So I want the next transient not to be affected by the compression of the previous transient. So you really gotta watch that your compressor is not squashing the next transient that you don't want to be squashed. It's really a game of giving and taking a little bit until the drums sound like they're grooving. It's funny. Once your heads start bopping, it's because you got your compression right. You see, and the ratio is just a 4. It's a standard ratio for this kind of stuff. See, the drums really come alive there. You can really hear the compression a little bit. You can hear the glue. And I'm soft clipping this plugin. And I love to soft and hard clip the glue compressor plugin. When you soft clip something tastefully, when you just don't completely cut your transients off, right? Because essentially clipping is cutting the transients, the top of your transients off. But if you do it tastefully and still leave some room for the transients up there, the rest of your drums are going to come up and the transients are going to be closer to them, but still be higher. And by bringing everything together like this with the clipping, it's a different way. Compression does a similar thing, but with clipping, everything gets way thicker. If you do it tastefully without killing the dynamics of your track, it becomes a thick boy. I'm not gonna lie. And everybody loves some thickness, right? And I hate saying that word because I have to go like thickness, but what that word describes, it's a very nice thing. Clip tastefully. You will enjoy it. I promise. Next step, channel EQ. Again, stacking EQs, remember? And this one, I'm working on the low mids a little bit. I felt that the drums needed more body. And to get more body, I boosted around 287 here, you see? And I boosted a little bit of the low end as well. Little bit of the high end, but mostly these low mids. I just wanted the low mids to come up and bring some body and aggression to those drums. You can really hear that thump there. in the background, being a little bit more present now. And lastly, one of the best plugins that Ableton has ever made, Drum Bus. Drum Bus, I think it was made for electronic drums, realistically, but it really works on normal drums as well. I'm doing some really big moves here. You see, I'm adding a lot of drive. I'm adding 100% crunch, and I'm adding some boom, some transients. I'm basically using the whole plugin right here, but I'm mixing it quite conservatively. And you're gonna understand why, because I'd rather do the big moves, the big boy moves, right? And then pull it back here in the mix, because that's basically parallel processing. And parallel processing really works for drums, because that way you can really make it sound aggressive in the background and then mix in tastefully. And as you can see down here, I'm automating this as well, which means that I can mix that aggression higher at some points and lower at other points. It's a great trick. I'm gonna do a whole automation video for this series, for this song. So make sure you subscribe to my channel to see the automation video, because it's gonna be one of the coolest ones. A lot of cool little tricks there. But yeah, mixing quite conservatively here. Let's just listen the before and after. Look at all that aggression. Drive, you know, drive is that cool thing that analog consoles have and we have to simulate in the digital world now. It brings harmonics to the drums and makes it spread more smoothly and equally through the track. And it gives that flavor, the analog flavor that we are always looking for. Crunch is a more aggressive version of the drive and it brings more high end to your track. And I'm really pushing it because I want these drums to be aggressive, but the crunch doesn't come through so much because I'm mixing it in quite low here. So remember, and the same thing with boom. Boom in this plugin just brings a fake frequency right at the bottom there, as if we recorded these drums with a sub mic on the kick, you know? So this creates a fake sub mic, which is really cool. Again, I'm boosting it quite a lot, but the mix makes everything better. I'm gonna put the mix all the way up so you guys can listen to how crazy this sounds all the way up. Nuts, right? But leaving it down here, it adds all of that aggression in the background and it's very tasteful. Anyways, lastly, you see here that in my send returns, I have a drum room. Here I have hybrid reverb in convolution mode, only convolution. You see, I'm not using any of the other stuff, just convolution. And Ableton comes with a made for drums pack here, and I'm using the big snare impulse response, and I'm just pushing my snare a little bit into that room there. You see, I'm pushing a little bit of my kick really, really quietly in there because I want that room sound in my kick, my snare, and my toms. Right here, you see, so I'm pushing that a little bit, you know, just gives it a little bit more of a space. For the snare can be a little bit longer, and I'm also automating that here into the whole drum group. This song has that bridge that's very emotional, very mellow, very spacey. So I just boost that drum room in that section, so the drums are a little bit roomier and more spacey in that section. You see, very spacey. If I turn off the drum room there, much more dry. So we needed to have that emotional reverb there in the background, and that's what we got. Awesome, and that's it for the drums. Whoa, I think that was a long video and it was just the drums. And that's why I'm dividing this series into different videos, because I think if I release this as one video, it would be about 2 hours maybe. So make sure you subscribe to catch the next episode of the series where we look into bass. That's gonna be a shorter episode for sure, but a very important one because the bass in punk rock is very characteristic, especially Mark Hoppus's bass. So make sure you stick around for that and press all the buttons around me that help me in this world right now. And I see you all next time. Thank you and bye.
That's about the time she walked away from me. Nobody likes you when you're 23.